Rhizosorb is redefining what growers expect from phosphate fertilizer. Backed by data and built for performance, Rhizosorb helps reduce phosphorus losses, improve uptake, and boost ROI without increasing input costs. Join the next wave of growers switching to the next generation of phosphorus fertilizers by visiting phospholutions.com.
You're listening to the Ag Policy Connection, brought to you by Real Agriculture in partnership with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. We're connecting the dots between the people and the policies that shape agriculture and farming today and into the future.
Welcome to the Ag Policy Connection, a podcast where we talk about the big ideas and fresh thinking needed to solve the big challenges and seize the big opportunities facing Canadian agriculture and food. I'm one of your hosts, Tyler McCann, the Managing Director at the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. I've been working in ag policy and politics for 20 years, and I'm a policy wonk.
And I'm not, but I'm your other host, Elise Bigley, the Director of Strategic Projects at CAPI, Canada's agriculture and food think tank. In this podcast, we'll be talking to leaders across agriculture and food about their big ideas to create generational change in ag policy.
That's right, Elise. We think the time has come for ag policy to catch up with the changes happening on farms, in processing facilities, and across the system that produces food and more and gets it to customers in Canada and around the world. We are excited to work with Real Agriculture to bring some of the big ideas for change to you. Make sure to visit CAPI's website to subscribe to our mailing list, follow us on our socials, and on YouTube to keep up to date.
And with that, let's get started. So today we're joined by Terry Betker, who is the founder of Backswath Management, providing leading-edge management consulting services, tools, and resources to farms and agribusinesses. Terry is passionate about providing consulting expertise to farmers, focusing primarily on strategic and transition planning, financial performance analysis, and general business management. Terry's roots go back to the family farm still in existence near Souris, Manitoba, where he farmed with his parents and brother for nearly 20 years. We're excited to hear from him today. And Terry, welcome to the Ag Policy Connection.
Oh, thank you for including me on your podcast. I've been looking forward to it since we first spoke about it, Elise.
Excellent. I have too. So Terry, we'll jump right in. Tell us, what's your big idea?
My big idea is to create a database of information that looks at correlation between how farms are managed, farm business management, and farm financial performance. And then to basically provide some empirical evidence that supports the notion that better managed farms are more profitable. And I think there's some extensions to it where we could take that foundational database of knowledge that we would capture there, and could be used by farmers, by advisors, by industry, by government, perhaps policy, and then we could drill down in discussions and provide more, maybe a little deeper, a little more insight into the correlations between farm business management and risk management and programming, and how all that impacts on farms' financial performance. That's my big idea.
Awesome. So before we dive more into the big idea, and I know Tyler and I have a lot of questions for you, we want to hear about the journey that led you to this big idea. So can you give us a bit more on your career and experience in farm business management?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. As you commented, I did farm and made the decision to, I guess sell the farm to my brother. We don't laugh about it, but we comment about it. That may not have been my best decision, given the price of land and where everything's gone. But I thought that the whole area of farming where farms are going to be more complex, and there's going to be a need for farmers to speak with other people, advisors, consultants about decisions that they're making on their farm. So I started Backswath, and we worked with farms early on, primarily around financial management, planning, that sort of stuff. But back when it started, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion actively about transition planning or human resource management, to where the industry has gone. And I've carried on with that path. There was a number of years there where where I basically merged Backswath into MNP and started the farm consulting group in MNP. And then I left and went back to Backswath 15 years ago. And we've been working with farm families ever since. And to your point, we help farmers with their finance and their management. And so logically, then when we're looking at farms' financial information, there's interest in how they compare to other farms financially, and that has value. But what I started to observe was that if you provide a farmer with a look at how they compare their financial performance to other farms, and you do that year over year, they notice that there isn't much change from year to year. I mean, their positioning within that peer set, that data set, doesn't change much from year to year. So they pretty quickly become curious as to, well, what are the farmers doing that are achieving superior financial performance from a management perspective? Well, yeah, that is the management. And so then we started looking at, so we could capture the farm's financial information, and now we capture the farm's management information, and we've created a program that allows us to drill down into understand what those correlations are. So, just not to carry on at length, but my idea here is that if we had, well, I'm not aware of a database that statistically examines the correlations between how farms are managed and what financial performance they're able to report. So when farmers then look at things that they might address from a management perspective to effect change, then what changes could they look at that might give them a different desired financial outcome? So if we had enough farmers in the data set, we had a big enough database, we could take that information and then go back to farmers and say, well, given your situation, here's 2 or 3 things that maybe you could look at that wouldn't be necessarily that obvious to them. So that's the extension of the big idea, Elise.
But Terry, if you go back to kind of that where you started doing the farm financial advising work and kind of what you see today, I'm sure that you've seen, or what have you seen for a change in kind of how farmers approach this? Are the conversations that you're having today with farmers or the peer groups you work with different than what you were having when you started out in this space?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, very, very much so. But I think Tyler, you will get that typical bell curve distribution. There's the leading edge, and then there's the large population in the middle, and then there's the lower quartile of farmers. So definitely from the upper end quartile of that, the conversations are significantly different. I think the conversations could benefit all the farms, but the ones that I've talked to, yeah, Tyler, they're a lot different than what they were years ago. They just incrementally, there's interest incrementally by farms to understand how they could better manage their business. And well, first off, they just want to be better managers. But there's in agriculture, because of the capital and the margins and everything you guys know, there's always the implications to what does this mean to our balance sheet.
But is this, I guess, what are the things that we think about at a policy level, kind of try to connect kind of things that happen at the 30,000 foot, something that somebody in Ottawa is going to be worried about versus what kind of a farmer that's thinking about their day-to-day business. Kind of one of the disconnects between the two of them is that I guess it's probably a pretty big disconnect. People in Ottawa probably don't often have a good appreciation for kind of the farm business management world that farmers live in. And I think that there's a sense that, because part of what you're alluding to, right, is that kind of 20 years ago, these things weren't necessarily top of mind for farmers, but that world is different today. I guess if you kind of put a bit of a lens at it, if you were going to try and explain to a policymaker in Ottawa about how life as a farm business manager or management advisor is different today than it was 20 years ago. How would you explain to them the difference in how farmers are thinking about business management today than they were when you got started?
There's more of a holistic look at how they approach management. I mean, obviously, they're going to focus on production, on operations, but they're more holistically interested in the other, I'll call them domains of management that impact on their financial performance. And I think that they're certainly still focused on optimizing production and on cash flow, I guess, if you will. But increasingly, they understand that there's other aspects of management, such as human resource management or formality around strategy, that have impact on financial outcomes. So I would say that, Tyler, the foundation of their focus hasn't changed much. It's operationally driven, and financially it's on cash flow. What's changed, though, is that the realization that there are other areas of management that also require attention and have significant impact on their future and on their financial performance. That's the change, and I think that's the change that we need to reinforce. The notion is that better managed farms are more profitable, but we could drill that down into better managed farms and profitability as defined by financial efficiency or liquidity or how much debt they're carrying. So we can start to understand then what decisions they make from a management perspective are and how they impact on their financial performance given their financial situation. So they are, I think, more and more all the time, and I think this is the right progression. They are interested in that broader look at the management of their businesses. That's what's changed.
Terry, I want to ask one more question before we dive more deeply into your big idea. So you've had quite a bit of experience in the community of farm advisors, and you've noticed quite a bit of change over the years. I'm wondering, what's the most surprising thing you've encountered over the years in terms of what's changed or working with farmers on farm business management?
Well, can I answer that question by commenting on what surprises me by what hasn't changed?
Absolutely.
And what hasn't changed, or what has been really slow to change, is the awareness that strategy matters, the plan matters, and then the drivers of that plan are the people, the farmers themselves. So it's how do they best utilize their human resource? Where do they spend their time? Where do they spend their energy? And I think that surprised me that it's taking longer than I ever thought to where farmers would be oriented towards embracing those kind of notions about how we could approach management more holistically in the business. It perhaps, the last what, 10, 15 years, maybe even more now, have been pretty good from a profitability perspective. Farmers have made money, and I think sometimes when cash flow's strong, maybe there isn't as much necessity to look at what are some of the other things from a management perspective we should be focusing on. So that may be having an effect on it. This current environment may be changing some of that thinking.
Yeah. So Terry, let's take a minute and think about the year ahead, right? Because I think it's a good segue into kind of your idea and why it matters. What do you think 2026 is going to hold for the average Western farmer that's out there that you see?
The farmers that I talk to they're cautious. The situation they're definitely aware of the situation, and what I mean by that is the cash flow is tight. If they do their cost of production estimates for 2026, there's not a lot of crops with a lot of margin. So I think there's quite a bit of caution out there. Now, Tyler, that then starts to then overlay on farms. So there were a lot of farms in Western Canada that had really good crops. So there's a lot of there's the volume of grain out there. It's just, as we know, the prices are really depressed. But there are farms, there are regions where they didn't have a crop, and then you got the double impact of, we don't have a lot of grain in the bin, so to speak, and the margins for next year don't look very good. So I think there's some caution out there. I'm hearing farmers talk about decisions around land purchases. There's concern about rental rates on land. The rentals have the expectations from the landlord about ratcheting back land rent that's disconnected with the current pricing and reality and for the grain farms. Oh, I think there's going to be a deferral in major capital purchases around what are the tractors, air seeders, sprayers, and combines. I think there's going to be caution about that.
And do you think it's different than it has been? Again, so if you think about this context, I guess I have two questions for you. One, when was the last time you think we were going into a year like this? So we talked about it's been a good time, but how far back do you go to think about the same conditions? And two, do you see this as a price problem? Is it because prices have softened because the markets have softened, or is this markets plus input costs plus kind of a perfect storm of things that are driving margins down?
Yeah. Well, the last time we got to where, more or less, right? The last time we got to more or less to where we are right now was in, and I'm going to maybe miss the year here, 2020, when the margins just didn't look very good. And then, of course, we had that huge price spike after that has buffered us along the way. And then before that, it was 2005. And I'm sure if we go back, we could find another cycle of when that occurred. And so, yeah, farmers have been in this situation before, but what's different though is every time in the past we've gone through those cycles and the prices have spiked and the margins have been there. Capital costs have increased, land's gone up, equipment's gone up, and when the margins narrow back up again, then we've got a widening gap between the capital and the margins, and a lot of that capital in this day and age is leveraged, so that correlates with risk. So the whole risk profile, the not just the production risk, but the general business risk profile has changed significantly because of the dynamic of narrow margins and increased capital costs. And I'm not a true economist. By observation, I think the problems right now are more correlated with price than with inputs, notwithstanding the land rent discussion in there. That's what I hear from farmers. They're worried about prices and where the prices are headed.
So I want to get us back to your big idea, and I think some of what you and Tyler were just talking about now is quite relevant to that. Why do you think your big idea is needed now?
Well, I don't mean to be smart with this comment, but actually, Elise, if not now, when? And let's just think about that a little bit. If right today that we had a data set of the information that we're talking about, so we have a data set of information cast over a bunch of farms for a number of years, that we would have knowledge about what the correlations are between how the farms are managed and what kind of financial performance they're able to achieve. And then we could take that information and apply it to young farms, to farms with high debt, low debt, whatever. So I don't believe that information. I don't believe that data set exists. It's anecdotally out there. There are studies that anecdotally look at management and finance. Most of the financial overlay of that is taken from just surveys. And so I think having, I don't know what the right word is, like statistically or empirically supported database that has some confidence attached to what those correlations are is something then that the industry collectively could use. And logically, to me, then 5 years from now, we would be in a better place, because if we don't have that information, we're going to be someplace 5 years from now. I just think we need that information now, Elise, and it's going to take a while to build that knowledge base up, but we should have it already. It should be there already.
Oh, I think that's a very valid answer there. What would it take to ensure farmers see this tool as a valuable tool that works for them rather than another reporting burden or another thing to add to their list? How do we kind of push through that barrier?
Oh, that is a really good question. I think there needs to be two or three things. So the first thing is we would need that database to be supported by by government. So I'm not sure if it's politically correct to say that, but just because government supports a program doesn't mean farmers are going to use it. But if it's captured and supported at the government level, and then we could engage advisors in helping the farmers use it, then I think that's the way to disseminate it. The third part of that, and I'm just thinking out loud here because I hadn't really thought of it that way before, Elise, but if we had farm groups to support it, we'd almost have a triangle of a relationship between government, the advisors, and the farm groups like the CAP or the wheat growers or canola growers. And then we're going to have to, I'm going to use the collective we. We're going to have to push it out to farmers. This isn't something where most of them would be asking for it. It was going to have to be, I think, pushed to them. And then I maybe I'm looking at this through way too rose-colored glasses, but I think my hope would be that once farmers started to use that information and started to actively apply it, whether it's in that relationship with their advisor or whether they're doing it on their own, then I think they would find value in it and start to better utilize it. And if I may, I base that last comment on I've done it with a couple of groups of farmers, and you can engage them in the discussion. And so, but they have to be engaged at the start. They're not just going to say, "Oh, whoa, I want to look at that."
And Terry, I think a lot of people would see this as a farm management discussion and not as a policy discussion, right? That this is different than the world that we live in. But we've got a project that we're doing now around agriculture risk management, trying to look at the next program framework, trying to look at potential changes to the business risk management suite. And as part of that work, what we've said, what we keep coming back to is farmers are their own first and best line of defense when it comes to risk management, that we need to look at proactive risk management, not just kind of business risk management programs. We do think that again, what's government's role in encouraging, incentivizing that proactive risk management piece. But there's a premise in there about filling gaps that exist when it comes to risk management. And I was wondering if you could drill down a bit into what gaps in risk management you see that this could fill? What is not happening that should happen that warrants this type of an effort?
I think mindset, Tyler. I think the farm's management mindset, where we would encourage them through, and I don't have all the hows this could work, but as let's if we continue to provide risk management that is largely purposed at production risk, then that's where their management focus is going to go. So I would like the policy in some way to encourage that broader look at the other areas of risk. And I don't know how you would do it, but to factor it into the programming, where there's a requirement that, yeah, here's your business risk management suite, and it provides this level of coverage, but there's other risks that are there as well, and that farmers need to contemplate what those risks are. I don't know if
Well,
I answered your question, Tyler.
well, you did it, and I want to go back to something you said earlier. You made a reference to the fact that one of the things that's changed over the time around farm management is that there's kind of a more holistic understanding of farm management. That this isn't just about production. This is now about human resources. You talked about kind of kind of the debt servicing capacity on farms, or kind of understanding what that kind of risk landscape looks like. That this is more than just effectively, am I going to get enough rain to grow my crop? To really kind of dumb that down a bunch. But the business risk management suite is really focused on production risk.
Yeah.
That is the kind of 2/3 of the taxpayer spend on business risk management is on production risk. So I think that when you think about what are the things that governments can do to encourage proactive risk management, that doesn't necessarily mean taking money away from those production costs. But I think part of what I'm hearing you say is kind of giving farmers tools like this, like access to a benchmarking tool that helps them understand how they compare to others, is a way for them to incentivize more proactive risk management. And I sometimes like it. That seems like a small thing compared to this kind of billions of dollars that we spend on production insurance, but it seems like an interesting way for governments to facilitate, enable, encourage proactive risk management in ways that they're not doing right now.
Well, and Tyler, the first thing we would give the farmers is just information. It's knowledge, and then how they apply it. That becomes, well, just like how do they apply their risk management programming to their businesses. So this would be an extension of that discussion.
Do you think giving the farmers the knowledge is enough?
Well, no, I probably misspoke. So making that knowledge available to them, then it's going to have some interaction with their advisors. At least there has to be a third party. There will be a very narrow band of farmers that would see that database, that information, and take it and apply it to their business. But no, there has to be third parties involved in this, at least at the outset. It'll be, I don't know how many years. It'd be a long time before anything that we're talking about would become standard practice, just like risk management is right now. It'd be a long time.
Yeah. And part of the context that this happens in, or this would happen in, especially if we could do this quickly, right, is that we are, as you said earlier, going into a time of tighter margins. And so you would think that may be the best incentive that farmers have to use a tool like this, is the tighter margins on their farm. I often think that as much as the government had talked about trying to drive down nitrogen fertilizer use, the best incentive for farmers to not use nitrogen fertilizer was these high prices that we've seen over the last years. Like, sometimes, believe it or not, the market is the best solution for some of these challenges that are out there. Do you think that how much of a change do you notice kind of in how farmers think about their management in the kind of the good times versus the bad? How much of a driver for use of a tool like this is kind of lower margins, actually?
Quite quite significantly. And perhaps it's more the opposite, where margins are really high. There's less incentive. That, if that makes any sense. So they become more, quite a bit more curious about what's going on in the overall management of their business when margins narrow up. But I don't. I think the biggest impact on it is just their complacency when there's cash flows flush. They don't tend to focus on. Well, they just flat out tell me that they've let their attention on farm management kind of slide a little bit when cash flow. And they got, maybe there's some things that we should have been focusing on that haven't got as much of our attention lately, just simply because we've got cash in the bank.
Right, and that kind of speaks back to your comment earlier about it's a mindset shift. So there's external forces like you were talking about that will cause farmers to look at things a little differently, but that mindset shift's kind of that overarching long-term change that would impact the way that they farm or they manage their business in good times and bad. So kind of looking into the future, how are you thinking kind of about the future of farm management? Like looking into like the farm of 2035, how will it be different? And what does good management look like for the farms of the future, or does it look any different? Like how will the fundamentals change?
I think it has to look different. I'm smiling at your question, Elise, because I made a presentation a week ago at a marketing conference in Moose Jaw, and the title of my presentation was Farm Forward Business Management in 2035. So I was looking forward 10 years. And so it's fascinating. We said, well, 2035. Well, yeah, I just happened to have thought about that quite a bit because I stood up and talked to a bunch of farmers about that. So one of my, where I started with that presentation was I made the comment that words that are currently used to describe farming, such as resilience and sustainability, I think they need to change, and I think the words that need to replace those are intent and alignment. And my thoughts around intent is farms. I had a peer group discussion just before this podcast, and we talked about that. And my belief is that farmers need to be intentional in how they approach the management of their business. And to me, intentionality looks at not the near term. It encompasses a way more than a focus on operations. So how are decisions made, and what is the intent behind those decisions? And then the alignment piece is there's multiple factors to alignment. So how do we align decisions? What's the alignment within a family about the direction? What's the alignment between the direction a farm is working towards, its vision, its future, and its financial performance? And then how is it managed? So that there are in all businesses, but particularly in farms, I think it applies really well, is the alignment that exists between what they're working towards, their financial strengths, their weaknesses, and their management. And to my point is, the worst scenario is when we get 10 years from now and the farmers fight, because their businesses are going to continue to become more complex. I haven't found a farmer yet that thinks that they're headed towards easier times. It's going to be more complexity for a whole number of reasons. And then increasingly it's the understanding how aligned their management functions are with their financial realities and with what they see their farm or where they see their farm 10 years from now is really important. That's more important now than it was 10 years ago, because farms are more complex now than they were 10 years ago. Oh, we just circle right back to, well, then farmers are going to have to manage within that dynamic. They will be in a different place 10 years from now. They just, I think, will benefit from intentionality of working towards what that future will look like. And we need to give them, they need to have access to information or knowledge that helps them to look at what the correlations are between how they manage their business and what those financial outcomes are. It's a big idea. It really is a big idea, because it doesn't exist, and we don't know. I don't know how. What I said to you when you asked me a few minutes ago. When do we? Well, we got to start. We need to start now. 10 years from now, it's going to be that much. We'd have this discussion, you guys, 10 years from now. We'd be talking about the same things, but the whole dynamic of what we will be talking about will be quite a bit different, I believe.
And one of the things that's interesting, that's changing now, it's certainly changed over the last 20 years, that I would imagine, or by all accounts, is going to change a lot in the next 10 years, is the scale, right? You talked about complexity, that what's at risk when a farm changes hands today is very different than it was then, right? This interesting debate over the summer about whether or not we're in this land bubble, and kind of one of the interesting pieces there is that you get some of these big farms to, like, again, 20 years ago when a land came up for sale, there were probably a half dozen neighbors around that would have had an interest in that land, would have been looking to take it over. Now you get some of these big farms that come up for sale. Kind of the scale and scope is such that there may not be any neighbors around that are able to take that on. And I think one of the things we say at the beginning of the podcast, the intro, is we want kind of the policy space to catch up to the changes that are happening on farms. So if you think about this kind of change that you just talked about over the next 10 years, and risk management really hasn't changed in 25 years. The tools that governments offer farmers, the kind of the role that they play hasn't changed very much. I get the sense a bit from your thinking that really kind of offering this information to farmers isn't even kind of like, this really is playing catch up. This is something we probably should have been doing a long time ago. But I guess what's your sense of kind of the broader policy space that government and the role that governments play in risk management? Are there other things the government should be doing at the same time as this to make sure that we're not just playing catch up, but we're ready for how the world's going to look in 2035? What else could or should governments be doing?
I think they should invest in that database that knowledge base that we're talking about. Because here's a really interesting way to look at that. Is that what if the notion that better managed farms are more profitable? What if that notion is flawed? And what if it had very little to do with management? Well, farms' financial performance had very little to do with management. It had a whole lot to do with timing and luck. And I don't know, but if that insight were to be true, and I don't believe it would be, but if that insight were to be true, that would then would it not impact on how risk management programs are designed? Or maybe they would just simply affirm that risk management programming that looks at production risk and financial impact, maybe that's all it needs to be. But I don't think that, but maybe.
Well, and again, I think we don't think that either, and I don't think kind of the work that we're doing on risk management would say that that's true, but we don't know. And one of the things that we don't know, that's kind of a big question mark in the work that we're doing today on our existing risk management suite, is how effective the tools are. Like, do they actually have a positive impact? Again, you said resilience isn't the right word to use, but it is a word that we use today. And we actually don't know whether or not the risk management tools, again, we spend about $3 billion a year on them, are improving farm resilience or not. I think kind of there's some ideas out there. Lots of people have lots of thoughts on it. not very many people have very much evidence around what impact do these actually have on farm resilience. And so having that database that you talk about doesn't just allow farmers to make better decisions, it would allow governments to make better decisions around, are we giving the farmers the tools that they need?
100%. 100%. I was able to participate in a curriculum review at a at a school of agriculture, and so that information could be used by academia to help develop programs. And so we're targeting the instruction at the right place. Industry could use that information. So yeah.
So Terry, to kind of close out this conversation before we get into our final questions, I'm wondering, what is the risk if we don't change? So if things just stay the same and this big idea is not implemented, or we don't change that mindset towards farm management, what happens?
That's a really good question. You asked some good questions, Elise. That there's not a chance there's not going to be farmers farming. I mean, we can't go there. What's the risk? I don't know what the risk is if we were to look at the entire population of farms. I think the risk then would narrow down to segments of farms. I think there might be more rationalization in the industry than what might need to occur. That might be a risk. That's a really good question, Elise. But the notion that their farms won't be farmed, no, they'll still be farmers. There'll still be farms moved generationally. And, somebody might look at this and say that maybe a risk, but I think we've got to go beyond 10 years. But I'm going to go way out there. So maybe the risk is that there are fewer family farms at some point. Maybe it becomes that much more corporate. And what I mean corporate is non-family owned farms that are farming. That could be an ultimate risk. And then Elise, Tyler, what the impact of that is on I'm from Western Canada, on the rural network. It just becomes that much more difficult to sustain that whole rural community if there's not family farms.
Yeah, can you dive into that a bit more? So what is the benefit of family owned? Like what else changes? How does that dynamic? I mean, farm management at consulting changes, I'm assuming with that change. Like what else would change with that move?
Yeah. Farm larger farms, even the average size farm nowadays is corporate. It's just the legal structure that they use. But I'm talking about industry managed farms. If you could go there, for example, what changes is that I think there's more passion at the family with what happens on the farm, and I find we're really doing the blue sky here. But if the farms, if the acres were all owned by non-family farms, I think it becomes pretty black and white, dollars and cents driven, and I don't think you have the same. The word I come is passion. Like farmers care. They just care. Even this year where they don't have a lot of margins, but the farmers that grew a good crop, that's why they farm. And they care about the land. They care about the future of the land. And they care about the fabric of the community. They want farms. They want their children to be able to farm. And for children to be able to farm, there needs to be a few children in the community that are farming. So I think that's the difference, Elise. I don't know if that makes sense. What do you think?
Well, it's an interesting question. And so we started off kind of this idea about we need to give farmers better data to make better decisions and kind of lean into that farm management approach. But we've ended up in this kind of space around, but really what we want to do is try and help maintain a mass of farms of kind of that people that are there that are farming in that traditional way. And I think it highlights, Terry, one of the issues, one of the challenges that we have when it comes to farm policy and farm politics. Are we talking about economic policy and business management, or are we talking about social policy
Yeah.
and rural communities and kind of how do we bridge that gap? And I think that there are these opportunities when kind of regardless of what we're talking about, giving farmers better information so they can make better decisions is probably a good thing. But how do you kind of divide that? If you think about it kind of from a farm business management perspective or from a policy perspective, how do you think through, okay, you've got the information, you know, kind of at a farm level what the business management, what the right decision might be, but then there's everything else that plays into it. And we think about that from a policy context. I can tell you what kind of the economics would tell you is the right policy decision to made, but then there's everything else that plays into it. How do you deal with that intersection between kind of the right business thing to do and then the right decision for a farm?
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating discussion. I love these interactions. Oh, I have some lived experience with that, and I'm not going to go down too far down this tangent. But I was in Chile a couple of times 20 years ago, maybe not, yeah, about 20 years ago. And what I observed at that time was that the agricultural policy was mostly a social driven policy. It wasn't economics. So the economics was just a minimum investment that they needed to support the social part of that policy because, well, frankly, what were they going to do with the farmers? I mean, they're going to end up in the city, and then they're going to be unemployed, which is all the social aspects of that. So I can't remember. That's quite a while ago, but what I remember of that now is that it, it was too late. They couldn't go back and start, and reset because they had already got too far down the road on the need to uh, look at what was going on in Chilean agriculture through anything but a social policy. So here, and we have to look at it. I think through an economic lens, through the economic priority, and just respect that there are social interactions, social implications of the family farms, the communities that we just talked about. We're still able to, I think, direct policy at Tyler. Maybe I'm not hearing your question correctly, but at the economic framework, but just respect that there's a social benefit to it as well.
So I think you're hearing it right, but I think there's a difference between the theory and the practice on these things. And again, I think there's an interesting comparison with a farm management lens because you could probably look at someone's books and look at their production practices and tell them kind of what the right or the best business decision would be. I guess maybe my question is how often do you kind of run into the difference between what you think makes the most sense from a business perspective and then kind of what's the best decision factoring all of these other things in? Because I do think it's a good parallel from kind of in the policy perspective where what might make the best policy decision versus kind of what makes the most sense given everything else that's going on.
Yeah, that's fair. And in the program, if I can, I wasn't going to get down. I didn't intend to get too far into the detail of how we capture management performance. But what we're talking about is part of our management assessment. Our management assessment isn't just on the business management principles of a farm. It does query the farm on the family, on the social, and on small e environmental focus because there are farmers out there that think differently about where their emphasis should be when it comes to management. Most of the farms would be oriented towards focus on the business, make money, and that's what we're doing. But the management assessment that we have, and we're able to apply a structural change modeling approach to the statistical analysis, and we can see what the correlations are between those different management functions and farms as defined by financial efficiency or the different metrics that we've talked about. So there is the potential within an expanded review of management to capture some of those social considerations, the family considerations, and the environmental considerations that are important to people. Well, yeah, yeah. So anyway, it's the intent of our management application back to finance is it's more, it extends beyond business, put it that way.
Kind of beyond the
So
numbers.
we would capture some insight into that, Tyler. I have no idea what it's going to tell us, but it will start to tell us. It'll start to give us some knowledge that we don't have right now.
So Terry, I know we could talk about, I said we won't talk for 3 hours, but I know we could easily, but we do have to wrap up now. And we always want to end with challenging you to answer, what is one thing you want people to take away? Just one thing.
The one thing I'd like people to take away is that management matters, and they can effect change in management. I've watched farms do it, and the farms that are successful at it, Elise, are the ones that approach it intentionally.
That's a great summary, Terry, and I think again a good parallel to kind of that still applies at the policy level as well. We really appreciate you taking the time to cover this with us, and again, I think that this connection between farm management and the policy world is really important, and hopefully we've helped connect some of that today with your idea. We really appreciate you taking the time.
As I said at the outset, I was looking forward to this, and this conversation has been really cool. Has disappointed me at all. So I thank you very much for the opportunity. Any chance I get to talk to people about farms and business management and all that sort of stuff, I look forward to it. It's always thought provoking, and it's always interesting. So yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity very much.
Thanks, Terry. So, well, Tyler, what did you think about that discussion?
I think it's a really interesting example of something that seems like a small idea, right? Let's create a database for better farm management and better benchmarking. But that actually is a really big idea. And it's something that's a small thing that governments could do that I think could make a big difference. And I think that we often, again, I think I alluded to this during the conversation with Terry, separate kind of the farm business management world versus the policy world. But boy, there's something to be said for government facilitating and enabling farmers to make better decisions. Farmers need to make those decisions on their own. And doing this seems like a really simple thing that would make a big difference that governments should do, but they're not doing today.
One of the things that really struck me about what Terry said when we were asking about what surprised him over the years, and his response on what he's been surprised hasn't changed, is that this might not be the right word, but inability of farmers to realize that like the drivers of the strategy are them. Like they are their, I know we talk about that in risk management, their first line of defense, but where they spend their time and energy really impacts the strategy and the way that the farm management goes, and like they are their best tool, and kind of that mindset shift that's needed on farm management and what that looks like.
And I think it's, we put out this report in 2025 with Farm Management Canada looking at proactive risk management. We've talked about a bit about kind of, it can be a hard time to articulate how do you actually put proactive risk management into practice, or what role the governments play in that, because this is, as you say, in this kind of the farmers thing. But this is a really good example of something that governments could do like they could play that role. This is a concrete change that they could make if they wanted to proactively incent proactive risk management on farms. And incent is maybe not the right word there, facilitate and enable this work on farms. I think the other thing that a couple of other thoughts. He talked about the challenge with 2026. I think that is something that we should be far more aware of in the policy space. I think that this kind of tightening margins, and it's worth noting and acknowledging that really we're probably talking about grains and oilseeds farms across the country. Again, if you're a beef farmer, 2026 is looking like it's probably going to be a good year, but for grains and oilseeds farms in particular, it looks like this is going to be tough. And that's going to have an impact, and it's going to have an impact on how farmers or how governments think about policies and policies around risk management. But this other piece around, there's this benefit around maintaining family farms, even family corporate farms, maintaining this kind of critical mass of farms. It's being one of the benefits if we do this now over the next 10 years and may put a brakes a bit on the pressure around consolidation. I think highlights, and we got into this during the discussion, highlights the challenge of, do we do farm policy for economic reasons? Do we do farm policy for social reasons? We like to, I think, have this image of this is all about kind of economics and growth, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of other things besides economic policy that come into how we think about these things. And that conversation was a good example of that.
Well, I want to thank our listeners for joining us today. If you have any big ideas yourself, we want to hear from you. So please contact us if you have a big idea for change in Canadian agriculture.
Thank you, Elise, and thank you again to Terry for joining us for this discussion. Stay tuned for future episodes of the Ag Policy Connection. And as we said earlier, go to our website, sign up to our newsletter, follow us on social medias, and stay tuned for more information.
Thanks, Tyler. See you next time.
Thanks, Elise.